He thought she was nothing more than a maid, someone meant to stay invisible in the glittering halls of his mansion. Laughter echoed when the millionaire mocked her, daring her to dance a waltz as though she could never belong in his world. Before we dive deeper into what really happened that night, make sure you're subscribed. Stories like these deserve to be heard, and you won't want to miss the next one. But what he didn't know was that behind the apron and quiet footsteps was a history that would leave the entire ballroom breathless. One spin, one step, one moment of truth, and everything changed. What happens when arrogance collides with hidden greatness? Stay with me, because this story will shake the ground beneath your assumptions. It was a grand evening in one of the city's wealthiest neighborhoods. Chandeliers glimmered above polished marble floors, and violins filled the air with music that spoke of wealth, power, and untouchable privilege. The ballroom belonged to one of the richest men in town, a millionaire whose arrogance was as vast as his fortune. Tonight he wasn't celebrating family or friendship, but flaunting his riches before his circle of elites. Among the crowd of sparkling gowns and tailored suits moved a quiet figure in a plain uniform. Her name was Clara, a black maid hired to serve drinks and carry trays, blending into the background like she always did. To the guests, she was invisible. To the millionaire, she was little more than a servant, a reminder of the world he believed, himself far above. But Clara's life had not always been defined by silence and servitude. Before she wore the maid's apron, she lived a life of rhythm, discipline, and beauty. Once she had danced under spotlights, her movements celebrated in competitions where passion mattered more than privilege. Life, however, had taken her down a harsher road, and now her talent remained a secret, buried beneath the weight of survival. As the night unfolded, laughter and arrogance filled the air. The millionaire, in a mood of careless cruelty, decided the entertainment of the evening would not come from the orchestra or the champagne, but from humiliation. His eyes fell on Clara, and a wicked smile spread across his face. He was about to make her the center of attention, not with honor but with mockery. The music shifted into a graceful waltz, the kind that had filled grand ballrooms for centuries. Couples glided across the floor, their gowns sweeping like painted strokes against the marble. The millionaire raised his glass, his eyes gleaming with amusement as he watched his wealthy friends spin and twirl. But then, as though struck by a sudden idea, he looked toward Clara, who stood silently near the edge of the room, tray in hand. Why not? He thought with a smirk. What better way to make his guests laugh than to pull the maid into the spotlight? In his mind, she was unworthy of the elegance of the dance, unfit to belong in the world of chandeliers and silken gowns. To him, she was a servant, a symbol of the very people he believed beneath his wealth and privilege. And so, he called her forward. At first, Clara froze, unsure if she had misheard. But the sudden hush that spread across the room told her otherwise. Every eye turned to her, piercing through her skin, stripping away her dignity before she had even moved a step. The millionaire's voice boomed with mockery, asking her to dance a waltz. His words dripped with sarcasm, as though the very idea were a joke, an evening's entertainment for the rich. A ripple of laughter spread across the room. Some guests whispered behind jeweled hands, others chuckled openly, delighting in the cruelty of the moment. Clara's heart pounded, her palms slick against the tray she still held. This was not just a call to dance, it was a stage set for humiliation. She knew what they expected. A clumsy attempt, a servant stumbling across the polished floor while the elite laughed at her expense. For a moment, she considered refusing. She could lower her head, apologize, and retreat into invisibility. That was safer. That was expected. But something inside her stirred, a memory of who she once was, of the stage lights that once burned against her skin, of the applause that once filled her ears. They had reduced her to a maid, but they could not erase the champion she had been. Taking a slow breath, Clara placed the tray aside. The laughter swelled, some guests nearly doubling over in anticipation of her failure. But they did not know the truth. Clara's body still remembered every rhythm, every step, every graceful turn of the dance that had once defined her life. And as the orchestra played on, her decision was made. She would not just dance, she would show them the power of a woman they had underestimated. The first step was hesitant, almost fragile, like a whisper against the marble floor. The guests leaned forward, their laughter still bubbling, waiting for the stumble, the mistake, the confirmation that their mockery was justified. But then Clara turned. A graceful sweep, her arm curving like water, her steps flowing with perfect precision. In a heartbeat, the room fell silent. Every movement was flawless, every spin timed with the rise and fall of the music. She was no longer the maid carrying trays. She was the champion who had once dominated dance floors, her name whispered with admiration in competitions long forgotten by those who never cared to know her story. The millionaire's smirk faded. His glass lowered slowly as disbelief spread across his face. He had intended a cruel joke, a spectacle of humiliation. But what unfolded was beauty, strength, and undeniable mastery. Clara's gown may have been simple, her shoes worn, but her presence eclipsed the jewels and silk of every other woman in the room. Guests who had laughed now sat frozen, their mouths open but silent. The very people who had looked down on her were forced to watch, powerless as she commanded the floor. Her body spoke a language older than wealth, sharper than prejudice. It declared dignity, resilience, and triumph. And then came the final turn. Clara spun gracefully, her skirt flaring like a wave, before landing with a poised stillness that filled the room with awe. For a moment, there was only silence, the kind of silence that weighed heavy, that revealed truth louder than applause, and then slowly it came, a clap, then another, until the entire ballroom erupted, not with laughter but with thunderous applause. The millionaire's mockery had collapsed into humiliation. He had tried to strip her dignity, but instead unveiled her greatness. Clara had reclaimed her stage and in doing so, shattered the walls of prejudice that had sought to confine her. As the applause thundered through the ballroom, Clara stood, frozen for a moment, her chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. For years she had been invisible in these same kinds of rooms, serving champagne, collecting empty glasses, overhearing cruel jokes whispered as if she were not even there. But tonight was different. Tonight they were forced to see her, not as a maid, not as a shadow, but as a woman of power, grace, and unshakable talent. The millionaire sat slumped in his chair, his smug laughter swallowed by the sound of hundreds, clapping for the very woman he had mocked. His attempt to humiliate her had only unmasked his own arrogance. His wealth could buy the stage, the music, the ballroom, but it could never buy what Clara carried within her: resilience, skill, and dignity carved through years of struggle. The son, who had quietly watched from the corner, was the only one who rose to his feet in genuine admiration. To him, Clara was not a spectacle but an inspiration. His smile was small but full of pride, a recognition that true worth is never defined by status or the color of one's skin, but by character and courage. The guests would never forget what they had witnessed. Some clapped because they had to, because the tide of the room forced them. But a few clapped with trembling hands, guilt flooding their hearts as they realized how quickly they had joined the laughter, how eagerly they had dismissed her before she even moved a step. Clara left the dance floor not as a servant but as a champion who had reminded everyone present of a truth they wanted to ignore. Dignity cannot be taken. It can only be revealed. And sometimes, it takes a single act of courage to pierce through centuries of prejudice. Later, whispers spread through the city, not about the millionaire's wealth or influence, but about the night a maid outdanced everyone in the room, about the night arrogance was silenced by grace. And perhaps that is the real power of moments like these. They do not erase injustice overnight, nor do they heal every wound, but they linger. They plant questions in the minds of those who witnessed them, questions that echo long after the music fades. How many times have we laughed before listening? How many lives have we dismissed before truly seeing? And how many more Claras must rise again and again, before the world finally learns. Because in the end, it wasn't just a dance, it was a revolution disguised in elegance, a reminder that prejudice may whisper loudly, but truth when it moves will always speak louder.